بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So past 2 days we spoke on the introduction Alif Ba, and inshallah today we will be getting into the letter Ta. So today's topics inshallah are going to be number one, how do you pronounce a Ta? Number two, some differences between a ta that's mutaharrik and a ta that's sakin. And number three, three common errors that happen normally when pronouncing the letter ta. So first, let's just go straight into how do you pronounce a ta. So ta, generally speaking, is pronounced by making contact between two parts of your mouth. The two parts that come into contact are the front of your tongue and the roots of the upper front teeth. That means wherever the top two front teeth are growing from, that the roots of that area. So basically your tongue is going to be almost on an area where it's the teeth and the gums are intersecting. That's where they're going to be. But that means the tongue is still somewhat on the teeth and on the gums at the same time. It's not only on the gums, it's not only on the teeth. And that's where a ta is pronounced from. One thing to keep in mind is when you pronounce a ta, because you put your tongue right on that area, the air that's coming from inside your mouth, this tongue actually in a way ends up blocking the air for coming out. And when you do that, that's how the pressure of the ta is created. Ta, ta. Another thing is the back of the tongue should remain at rest when you're pronouncing a ta. Although this is not common, if you end up raising any of the back of your tongue while pronouncing a ta, it will turn into a ta. It will turn into a ta, or it'll turn into a heavy ta that's between a ta and a ta. So the tongue should remain at rest when you're pronouncing the letter ta. So the front of the tongue should be on the roots of the upper teeth, and then you can pronounce the ta. So that is just in a nutshell, how do you pronounce a ta. Now, inshallah, we'll get to get more complicated as we go ahead. So first thing is obviously a mutaharrik ta. We talked about a haraka, I believe just yesterday, and what's the difference between sakin. I will not go into all that today. So, but generally speaking, when ta has a haraka, very simply, once you've placed your tongue on top of those teeth, release the tongue from the upper teeth and make the appropriate motion, or the fatha, dhamma, or the kasra. If we're going to make a fatha, then we're going to release the tongue from that top from our teeth, and then we're going to separate our jaws to make a ta sound. If you want to make a dhamma sound, we're going to release it, and then the side of our lips are going to somewhat come together. Tu. If we want to make a kasra sound, we're going to do the same thing, release the tongue, and then we're going to lower our jaw to make a ti sound. So ta, tu, and ti. Until now, whenever we're talking about anything with the haraka, it's always been easy, but whenever we get to sakin, things get really complicated. Ta is exactly the same. So before we get to ta being sakin, there's one major difference I want everyone to keep in mind, because it will make it easier for me to explain some specifics about when ta is a sakin. Most letters in the Arabic language can carry their sound even when they're sakin. What do I mean by that? For example, if we would make a noon sakin, we can carry the sound. We can carry it. For with the meme, we can carry the sound. With the lam, as, we can carry all of these sounds. It can carry. And then the ta, so you can keep carrying the actual sound forward. It's not like it comes to a stop. You can keep carrying whatever sound you had. When it comes to ta, it cannot carry its sound. You cannot carry the sound of a ta forward. And this inability to carry the sound forward in Arabic is known as shidda. It's called shidda, which is sort of hardness. And so, for example, if you try to carry the sound of a ta forward, you'll have a problem. You'll do nothing will come out. Yeah, if you release your tongue, then you're cheating. That means you're not carrying the sound, you've pronounced it. So you can't carry a sakin ta sound forward. It's not working. So this quality of a ta where you cannot carry it sound forward practically makes it impossible to actually pronounce a sakin ta. If you think about it, since you can't carry the sound of a ta forward when it's sakin, it almost seems as if you cannot even pronounce a ta that's sakin. For example, if the word in the Quran was katabat, right? And if you stop on the sakin ta, it will be katabat. It's like you can't carry the sound forward. So what do you do in those situations? Now, ta is one of the letters of shidda. There are actually other letters as well. There's a whole phrase called ajidu qatin bakat that tells you about all the letters of shidda. Inshallah, we'll cover them as we go. But ta is a letter of shidda that does not allow the sound to carry forward. Now, how is that solved? To overcome this problem in the Arabic language, the Arabs, what they would do is naturally, what they would do is they would release the tongue just a bit. It won't carry the sound forward because the problem is you can't carry it. It's impossible. But what they would do is when you're pronouncing the ta as a sakin, if you pronounce any other letter as sakin, you don't need to release the area where the letter is being pronounced from. You can just say un, and you can keep, or if you're doing a meme, you can keep your lips closed. And you can pronounce it as sakin. But with the ta, you can't do it. The sound dies. So in order to get around it, you have to release your tongue a bit, and you'll see a breath sound coming from it. At. I'm exaggerating a bit, but at. So it's like a breathing sound that's come. It's kind of like when you spit. That sort of sound is coming out. This in the Arabic language in Tajweed is called hums. It's called hums. We won't go into hums. That's a whole separate topic. But this is what happens. It's called hums. Now, once this has been understood, let me explain some details about a ta that's sakin. So a ta that is sakin, whenever a ta is sakin, there are actually two phases. Some very, very high qurra in the world, when they want to test students of Tajweed and Qaris, they ask them a question about ta being sakin. So I'm already giving you the answer to it. The ta has two phases it goes through when it is sakin. Phase number one is that the tongue goes on the teeth, and because of that, the sound of the ta stops. Up, it stops. That's shidda. Phase number two is right after that, the tongue is released to give a slight breath sound, like a minor spitting sound. At. So there's two steps. First, the tongue goes on the teeth, and then it gets released. It's I'm going to exaggerate so you can hear, kind of like that, right? We shouldn't create a ha or a ha in the process, like that shouldn't happen. But it's just the release of the tongue and the breath that's coming is forcing that sound to come out. So the first part, as I mentioned, is called shidda, and the second part is called hums. Now, one very important thing is this hums is a natural process. It should not be forced. This is where we come to a problem. In other languages like Urdu, a ta that's sakin does not have hums. It does not happen. That concept doesn't exist. For example, is there a word in Urdu that ends with a ta? Bat. Right? You don't say bat. You don't do that. So in other languages, when you do a ta that's sakin, there is no hums. And that's okay. The Qurra of Tajweed, they write in their books that other languages don't have that. But the Arabs would do this. They would do hums in the ta. They would create a slight little thing called that little sound that comes there. So that is whenever you have a ta that's sakin. So based on this understanding, I want to go through three different common errors that happen with the ta. They're not all connected to this, but they're somewhat connected. So there are three errors that are common with the ta that's wrong. Actually, it's not only when there's a ta sakin, there'll be one non-ta sakin situation too. Number one, right, which was what we were talking about, not releasing the tongue in ta sakin to create the breath sound. For example, if someone doesn't release their tongue, they're gonna say laha ma kasabat وعليها ما اكتسبت. That's wrong. Because the breath sound, the humps didn't come out. If you say لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت, that's wrong. That's wrong because humps didn't come out. It should be لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. The kaf actually has a hump sound too. We'll get to it later. Right? لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. ما اكتسبت. But that slight breath sound, that's called humps. So that's one mistake that's very common in ata, and you can't blame people because of two reasons. Because in their language, this does not exist. And reason number two is in most books of Tajweed, they won't mention this much detail in this much depth. They'll tell you, oh, letters of Hamza this, it means this, but they won't go through this much detail. So that is one common mistake. Common mistake number two is, this is more amongst American kids. I have some students that do this too. Pronouncing the ta with the tongue being a bit behind the root. So as I mentioned, your tongue should be on in the area that intersects between the teeth, top teeth, and the gums. So it's almost touching both of them. Ta, ta, ta. So you can feel your tongue on your teeth and on the gums at the same time. Ta. But if you move your tongue up, it goes up and it's not touching the teeth at all. You're going to create a T instead, a T. So instead of saying kutiba alaykumul qitalu, tiba, talu, they say kutiba alaykumul qitalu. And actually, I have quite a number of students that do it. They say kutiba, kutiba. Whenever kutiba comes, they're going to say kutiba instead of kutiba. It's kutiba, not kutiba. If it happens sometimes while you're reading, that's not a big deal, but it shouldn't be a thing where you think that is how you're supposed to do it. In some Arab dialects, they read the ta like that, but this is not tajweed. This is not the out of Arabic of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there should be no T sound because that tongue needs to touch the teeth as well. That's mistake number two. That's quite common. Third mistake, which is not as common, but some people sometimes do it, is they hear Arabs making the hump sound of ta and they go too much into it. So when you force the humps, like I said, this hump sound, that breath sound is natural. But it's natural. But if you force it, what's going to happen is you're going to make your tongue go all the way down, and you're actually going to create something that's a mix between a ta and a sin. So it should be إِذَا السَّمَاءُ فَطَرَتْ. But with some people, they exaggerate the humps, and it turns into something like إِذَا السَّمَاءُ فَطَرَتْ. It's like a TIS sound coming at the ending. فَطَرَتْ. So that's because they're forcing the humps and their tongue is going down. The tongue should have not gone down. It's just being released. It's just a release. It's not supposed to be moving up or down. So when they force the humps, they create this sinish TIS sound. Either sama fatarat. And I have students that do that as well. However, it should be either sama fatarat. That's it. So these are some common errors that do happen with the ta that you'll see different. Again, this doesn't mean these mistakes are lahn khafi. So if someone makes overall they're khafi as opposed to being jelly. So these three mistakes people do not need to worry about that much, but nevertheless they are pretty common with the ta. So inshallah we'll end off over here, and tomorrow we'll go into tha, jim, ha, a bit more easier. إن شاء الله. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.